Winston received a nerf this last patch, and a unanimous groan came from the Overwatch community. It was finally Winston's day in the sunlight. It's finally his time to shine. It was finally his time to be the top performing tank. Winston has been one of the most gate-kept characters in all of Overwatch. He's one of the most skillful and fair tanks in the game, and we finally become meta tank, and they blue ball us 2 fucking weeks later. Meanwhile, lower skill characters like Hog, Malga, and even D.va are allowed to run the meta for months at a time going unchecked. It's extremely frustrating. Now, Winston is still pretty strong this patch. The 5 damage DPS nerf is more significant than you think, but it doesn't mean that he's weak by any means. It's more this pattern of them allowing characters that are a lot less fair, a lot more frustrating to play against, a lot less skillful to be strong for so long, and anytime Winston gets his day, they take the rug out from under him merely weeks later. Like, I remember a few patches ago, Winston felt like he was going to be really strong, and then like a week later they buffed Brig and it was over. Winston just has struggled in Overwatch 2. I think he's been strong for most of Overwatch 2, but it doesn't matter when Hog's also strong, when D.va's the strongest tank in the game, when Malga runs lobbies for months at a time. It just doesn't matter how strong Winston is when there's a better option that's much easier to execute, and basically just fucks the monkey, you know? It's crazy. He's a victim to terrible hero design. I think Malga was an awful character with high spread and high damage, just a tank busting nightmare to play into as Winston. Characters like Brig, which just say no to dive characters very easily. It's just so many characters counter Winston, and I gotta ask, when are they gonna take a look at that and say, okay, maybe we need less counters for one of the most fun tanks in the entire game. On top of that, Overwatch 2 has had a really bad player psychology with the counter swapping, and this was mostly due to the ult retention when swapping heroes, and I don't really even understand why we still have that in the game. When counterwatch is like one of the biggest problems, when counter swapping is one of the biggest problems, why do we have any incentive at all to swap characters? Like, I know it's only 15% right now, and it's not actually that big of a deal, but it's more the psychological fix of like, what if we just took that away? Would players not counter swap as more? We should be trying to discourage counter swapping as much as possible, because that's the main complaint about the game right now, and yet they do almost nothing to fix that. They don't really understand the painful points of the counter matchups. They don't really soften the counters. They just kind of move these numbers around randomly and hope that something works, and it just sucks. This dev team kind of sucks. I'm kind of done with them. They are like just so brain dead. They don't understand their game. They shouldn't be balancing a competitive game by any means. Like, I'm sorry, I've seen enough. I've seen so many patches where they've just biffed it over and over again. Sorry, this is gonna be a bit of a rant. Like, I just, like, when's Winston gonna actually become meta? We've been actually asking for him to be the strongest tank in the game for a long time, and it's okay for Winston to be the strongest tank in the game. Ideally, in the lower ranks, a skillful tank like Winston should have lower win rates, lower than 50% perhaps, and then in the higher ranks, he should have a higher win rate, over 50%, 55%, something like that. But that's not the case. He just has a shit win rate from bronze to GM. You have to do so much more work on Winston when you're playing against like a Hog. Like, think about it, like how much more skill do you have to express on Winston than you do the Hog player? Like, it's on the Winston player to get his timing right, to get his engagements precise, to get his positioning so precise. Like, the amount that you have to outplay these brain dead 0 skill tanks is actually insane. Now, it's okay for Winston to be the top performing tank because he's fair, right? Like, when you die to a skillful and fair character like Tracer, for example, you don't go back to the spawn room and say, this game sucks, I can't do anything, I hate this character. You go back and you say, okay, what if I land the headshot, right? Like, that's what a good character, a well-designed character should motivate you to, when you're walking back from the spawn room, to just do it better, to hit the sleep dart. So maybe like you get killed by a Winston and you're like, okay, well, I threw my sleep dart into a shield, so what if I hold on to it and back up a little bit, and now I have something that I can do better, and now I'm more motivated to improve and to get better at the game. Like, these devs have no understanding of what's actually fun and fair, and they just buff the dumbest shit. Like, I'm so tired of it. I think we're all so tired of this. It just feels like an extra kick in the dick because these other tanks that are way more problematic than Winston don't get a single patch note to fix them for months at a time, for seasons at a time. I mean, take D.va, for example. Yeah, she got a 0.5 second reduction in her matrix meter, but she continues to just be this dominating problem, and yet she goes through this patch unscathed. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Why nerf Winston on day one of him, you know, getting his time to shine, and not even touch D.va? That's just insane. Like, I genuinely just believe these devs are fucking stupid, man. Like, they just don't know what they're doing. So like I said, Winston's still probably one of the strongest tanks in the game, but this 5 DPS damage nerf is actually more substantial than you might think. So the way that Winston does damage is this slow over time kind of damage with the Tesla, at least. I mean, he has some bursts with like his jump and primal and all that kind of stuff, but just with like his primary fire, it's this slow damage over time. So usually that target receives some amount of healing within that time. And when you're only out damaging the healing by 25, 30 damage per second, and you take 5 damage off the top of that, that's actually a pretty substantial buff, and it just feels awful to play against like Brig healing, Zen Orb, even like Soldier fucking heal station feels terrible to shoot into. Like, Winston still ignores armor. He's just gonna get bullied out of meta by D.va now this patch. Like, it felt like it was finally doable, that I could, you know, if I executed my plan well and was able to express mechanical skill, that I could beat the Hog player, that I could beat the D.va player, that I could beat the Malga player. I still had to do a lot of work and play a lot better than them, but it felt doable, and now I'm just afraid that's not the case. It's just not gonna work out that way. D.va's gonna get the better of me more than not now. Like, I can be so much better than the enemy tank and just lose a game, and that's so frustrating as a Winston main, and I feel all of us Winston mains really feel this. Like, to win a game on this character, you actually have to be way better than anybody else in the lobby. It's crazy. And like I said, it's like, it's okay for Winston to have his day. It's time for Winston to have his day. I don't need him to have a 65% win rate across the board from bronze to GM. I just want him to have like a 55% win rate in GM. Like, I think that would be a good metric to aim for. If the most skillful players are playing the character and not able to win games, then what's the point? What's the point of having skill in a game where you can just pick a different character and win the game? You know, like, this fucking sucks, man. It's just a kick in the balls. Like I said, like, this patch isn't the end of the world. It's just a pattern. It's just a pattern that just keeps repeating itself. It's just so frustrating. I don't even fucking know.